So fantastic. Okay, let's get started. Thank you again so much for your time, for your generous time to engage in a dialogue with me. I think you need no introduction. And if people need to be introduced to you, they'll be introduced through the engagement of this dialogue regardless. This is, of course, Enrique Enriquez. Thank you so much for your time, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
Thank you. So to start our conversation today, I'd like to set the table, if you will. And I'd like to set a table with a little bit of a story. Here in Los Angeles, we have wild parrots, and they tend to fly in groups. And my husband enjoys watching them, and he tends to hear them because they have a very particular sound they make. And he told his daughter in Portland that we have these wild parrots here in LA. And when he told her about these beautiful parrots, her response was, "Can you catch them?" Which sets the table for what I want to talk about today. And I want to start off by talking about images, because to me, everything is an image. Our thoughts are images, our sense of smell is an image, memory is an image, dreams. And I feel that today, more than ever, there is what's happening, what I call is an assault on an image, where we tend to project, personalize image, construct the meaning. And as a result, we enslave, entrap, we capture the image and keep it captive. And I think one of the reasons we do that is because we want to maintain control over knowing, over meaning. And I'm a psychologist in transgender field. So I stumble on this all the time, but people need to know, need to have a language, need to have a way to define. What are your thoughts on this idea of today more than ever, the captivity of an image and making it yours and enslaving it?
Yes, well, I think the image of the cage is apt to talk about our folly and the way we are doomed to our own folly, which means that in our relationship with the invisible, which is something that every single person has to figure out themselves, which degree of relation we have with the invisible, we are doomed to always fail. Because if we arrive at a place of certainty over these questions that have no answer, we crystallize into dogmas. And we know how that goes. People die, get raped, or very unhappy. But the opposite possibility is that we never find the answers. So we live in a constant state of emptiness, right? And you see that with people. So we cling to what we call the meaning of things, to try to make sense of them. And as you say, is to try to feel safe. In that sense, you know, there are no edges in the world. Everything is smooth or continuous. But when you make a drawing of a thing, you have to find the line. You have to find the edge. You have to say, well, that glass ends here. And I find it very peculiar because it's very hard for us to actually not only remember and recount our dreams, but to make images out of our dreams is vague always. And I think it has to do with the fact that in the waking world, this world we are in, we see the edge, we see the end of things, we see the outer line. But things have an inner line. That is the one that comes up in dreams. So in a dream, a thing maintains that inner line, even if the outlines are changing all the time. So it's really hard then to say what is what, because we don't know where it ends. I mean, in the dream, we never know where the thing ends. In the real world, we figure that out. So we make lines and we say, this is a glass, this is a mountain. And that line has the value of a name. We also name things to feel safe. You say, oh, you are this, you are that. And of course, both names and lines are desires that are always impermanent, because a thing can be many things or look in many ways, and we don't really know the end of a thing. So I understand what you say, and it's funny because we want to get the bird and to catch the bird, put in the cage, because somehow we feel that then we will have access to this experience whenever we want it, rather than waiting for it. Here in New York, there are no big parrots, but for some weird reason, in every intersection, you have a street light that always has like a sign with the name of the street that moves like this with the wind, and the hinges sound like parrots. So when I walk around, I hear parrots all the time, parrots that are not there. And in a way, I feel, well, just by recalling that sound and calling it parrot, I am putting it into a cage.
Yeah, I find it very interesting, this need to capture and keep the image captive. And I often ponder where that need arises for all of us, right? And I was watching your lecture, which I very much enjoyed. I'll link it if people want to see it, looking at the line. And one of the things that struck me is when you talked about your perhaps maybe awareness or understanding of the soul through the roots, the Greek root, right, of the soul as the sea. And you realize that the sea is also horizontal lines, that and the waves are moving in and out. And in Spanish, the soul root is to breathe, and how the diaphragm goes up and down. And so also in and out. And in a way, the soul is always in dialogue with the world, because they move in and out. And I realized that in order to experience this, one has to be able to sit in the unknown, because this demands to be able to sit and not know without having the need to mentalize what is happening. What do you think of that? Why do you think it's so challenging? And I think this is why we want to capture the meaning, because we have such a hard time sitting with this.
Well, it's a beautiful question. I am convinced that human beings, we are the only animal that doesn't know or doesn't understand what's going on. And that's part of our tragic nature. We are, in theory, intellectually more capable than other animals, or at least that's how we want to perceive it. But we are the only ones who don't know what's going on. You sit at a garden and all the creatures know what's going on. And there is almost like a symphonic sense of the moment. And we sit there and we're looking around like, I don't know, what is this? So we are, I guess, we live in this, I mean, we are paradoxical creatures. So we know that we can be here, and at the same time, we can be over there. So we live in the present with a memory of the past, with an anticipation of the future. And half of our dealings with the world obey to all these other dimensions that exist in us simultaneously. So that gives us the advantage of being able to exceed the moment, which is fantastic sometimes, whether because we want to escape the moment or because we can see a possibility that is not apparent in the moment. But that also dooms us to always be out of sync with the moment. We're always elsewhere. And so it's hard because we have to negotiate, again, the degree in which we are here and there at the same time, the degree in which we are present and absent at the same time. I do find, I mean, the word soul is so problematic because it's a word that belongs to all these corporations of the spirit. And so you deploy that word and somehow you seem to be endorsing these corporations. But it is a necessary word. I mean, we need a word for that rhythm that is inside of us and connects to the world. And it's this back and forth in which we leave our imprint in the world, and the world leaves an imprint in ourselves. So I do find the relation with the sea and with the diaphragm, the relation with rhythm, understanding it is rhythm, very important. I think that the main problem, I've been thinking a lot about folly recently, and the main problem is really our hunger. I mean, if you see to look at the sea, and I live by the river, so I can see every afternoon the miracle of people living anything. They put down the books, their phones, whatever it is that they're doing, they put it down to look at the sun setting. It happens every day, and it never gets old. It's this overwhelming thing that says bigger than anything. You can't avoid paying attention to it. But in a way, it's an exception, meaning most of the time, if you approach something and you say, look at this, it's just beautiful. People will say, yes, it is beautiful, but I'm hungry. And that beauty doesn't satisfy my hunger. I want to know if I'm going to get a job, or if I'm going to be able to pay the rent, if I want to beat loneliness, will I find a boyfriend? So we have this, sadly, this inability to embrace beauty in itself. So it's very hard for people just to sit in front of the sea and say, okay, this is it, and I will find all the answers. Because what I feel is that the experience of nature is the experience of waking up from the dream of our language.
Yes.
The city, the culture, we go there and we look and say, oh, now I remember, this is what the thing is about. Of course, we go back to the city and we fall asleep again. We forget this waking state. But it's based on this hunger. We have these urgencies which are legitimate. I mean, yeah, we need love, we need shelter, we need some sort of certainty, which is a weird word. I mean, it's really funny because if you tell people, we don't know about the future, we don't know what's going to happen, we don't know what happens when you die, they hate you, they really resent you for this. You're not supposed to say that. But if I say, well, no, I know, I could tell you what's going to happen, I read in this book, this dragon with 7 heads is going to come and kill everybody, and then a few people will go into a cloud and everybody else will burn. People thank you, say, oh, that's a relief. That's so wonderful now that you told me that. I can't sleep at night. This is insane, right? We rather know a horrible outcome than live within the uncertainty of life.
Yes, but I think that we're also hungry, and very much so, for this dialogue. And
yes,
right, more than anything, I think, especially today with the abuse of technology, we lose ourselves. And you said that when we speak of the soul, we're tailoring to corporations. I think when we talk about the relationship of engagement with the unknown, then we are breaking down or negating what corporations aim to do. Because that is antithesis, right, to what they think about as a soul.
Yes. The bad news are that in our dialogue with the invisible is every man for himself, like a shipwreck. The moment 3 or more people get together, somebody's going to get raped, somebody's going to get killed, and it's going to go horrible for us. The good news is that we get to talk about this lonely path with other people. We get to sit with other people and compare notes. It doesn't mean that we have to embrace what the other is doing. We don't have to follow what the other is doing. They don't have to follow us. But we can share notes. We feel the same hunger. And we can talk about the way we go about it. So, yes, I think that, you know, when you listen to a bird, if you really listen, you know what it's saying. And there is this certainty that gets installed in you that disappears the moment the bird flies away. But it leaves a sediment. And that sediment is a way of being in the world that you may not be able to explain. It's a reminder of that wake-up call. That if you were to, and then again, we go back to your first comment, the cage. The moment we want to say, no, but tell me what it means, we're doomed, because it doesn't, it means itself in terms that are not human. Means itself in terms of the rhythm of the world. We could connect with that rhythm through the song of a bird, or through the sea, or through even now I hear a truck backing up, and you have to, you know, that beep, beep, beep sound.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way you can get and connect to the bigger picture to it. But you can't say, oh, that means that you need more salami, you know. But so people want to live at the, and again, maybe it's about being doomed to be in two places at the same time. We want to reduce everything to our human scale. Say, yeah, but how do I get a boyfriend out of looking at the sea? And it doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess getting our hungers satisfied is also part of a rhythm, like the waves of the sea or the song of the bird, but it's not under our control, which is maybe the worst news of all.
Yeah, I find dreams in this respect are very interesting, and I'm not a fan, even though I went to web psychology school, I'm not a fan of interpreting the dreams. I'm a fan of feeling the feeling tone that the dream brings, like the it's here and it's not there. It came and it went. And I feel that when we interpret the dreams, we do just what you're talking about. We immediately assign the meaning and we take it from somewhere else. But in that sitting in the unknown, right? So we're talking about, in so many ways, we're talking about a way of being in the world. And I'm always captivated by the way we find ourselves being and relating in the world, because I feel that there's three overlapping worlds happening simultaneously. You know that, I don't know what the diagram is called, but one of these diagrams.
Yes, of course.
Okay, I don't know what it's called, but so one of the circles would represent our inner world, subjective world, where we construct our own meaning. They're personal to us and due to our history, so on and so forth. Then there's the natural world. And then there is a man-made, a people-made world. It's a world that we impose into the natural world. I think about that world as, you know, when you go to a park, a particular park like we have here at Getty Center, and the hedges are trimmed very controllingly, very straight. That's to me a very imposed world, natural world, on top of a natural world. And the three of them overlap. And I find that today, especially, we are polluting our engagement with the natural world. Imagine as if the two circles of our inner world and the man-made world is growing and overlapping the natural world.
Well, I mean, the first thing I think it's important to address is the fact that we are told constantly that we are in an ecological crisis, which is true. That implies that we are responsible for the natural world. But we are never really told that we are also responsible for the symbolic world. The images we carry in our heads, the narratives that propel us forward, we are responsible for those too. And we are in a ecological crisis of the symbolic world, because the amount of pollution we have right now in the symbolic world, in which there are too many images, too many things. There's no, that thing you say before, the possibility of staying with the image of the sea, for example, is no longer possible for most people because there's just too much stuff. I was talking to a friend who showed me a painting by Salvador Dali, and this painting has keep him company, this image, for 5 decades. This is an image where he goes to find comfort, strength, clarity. We no longer make images that will last 5 decades. We make weak images that are there to be give us a little thrill now and then leave us hungry. So we are there is also that responsibility, which is, I mean, okay, fix the sea and the mountains, but can we fix our dreams? These things that the world that inhabit us, which is to some extent bigger than the world outside, can we actually take care of that? And of course, the symbol with the 3 linked circles recall immediately the mandorla, which is the intersection of 2 circles that we see in the world card of the tarot, right? And that is a representation. I mean, I think that symbol, the intersection of 2 circles, is a symbol for symbols. It's a symbol for the in-betweenness of things. And of course, in the tarot, you see this ellipse, and you see a woman inside. So we call it the world, but in a way, the image is showing us another world.
Yeah.
Which is, we can say, well, it's that other, whatever we want to call it, right? But it's that sense that, yeah, we are here, but we could be there. And in truth, we are in between all those words you mention all the time. We lose awareness of those worlds. Sometimes we forget they exist, but sometimes we forget they are different. I mean, sometimes they are just an extension of each other, right? And we are equally responsible for all of them. There is something else in what you say that I think is key. We are now under the impression that we are really interesting. Every single person thinks my subjective universe is worth a movie, you know, it's amazing. And I find solace, peace of mind in thinking I am the least interesting thing about my life. Everything else is fascinating. I don't have to impose my personality, my desires, my will on the things that are happening because they are just perfect. So yeah, I that's a beautiful idea.
I'm thinking about pollution. Obviously, we're literally polluting the world, and it's parallels the pollution, the way we use language to pollute our mind, to pollute the images, right? And do you think that to some extent we're all doomed with our abuse of language?
Oh, that's beautiful. I always go back when I want to feel at peace. I go back to the image of that museum that burned down in Brazil, and everything in the museum disappeared except for a meteor that was left standing there, iron that came from the sky and didn't care at all about the fire. So that gives me peace and hope. Whatever we do, no matter how amazing or how urgent it feels, won't last. So I don't see that as being doomed. I see that as being free. We are free from this burden of the importance of what we do and who we are, because it doesn't matter really. So we can only engage in the small time, in the small leagues. You know, people, I always find funny that people pray for things, and I'm not making fun of the fact they pray,
Right.
but they want these specific things. Like I really would like to do better in that chemistry test tomorrow. Please help me out. And the constant that is underneath everything, sustaining everything, is too busy building a mountain. It's like, it doesn't express itself in human terms. So I do think that so I don't think we are doomed in a horrible sense that we are going to disappear. Of course we're going to disappear, but who cares? I mean, we imagine for a second that every grain of sand in a beach in California has a wonderful personality and a deep subconscious life. Maybe the case, we just don't care. We don't see people scooping sand and listening to see if they have anything to say. So we are grains of sand.
And I don't think we'll disappear. I think that we're doomed in a sense that the more we assault, not only image, forget image, we're assaulting image for sure, but for assaulting language, we're raping, we're molesting, we are doing horrible things to language in of itself. I think that dooms us in a sense that it fragments us even further from the engagement. And that's to me is scary. That's to me is terrifying.
Yes. No, I actually forgot about the language part because I went another way, but language, I mean, we have two things we do that are the foundation of our creative reality. I mean, we are creative beings. When we close our eyes, we make light. We call it dreams. It's insane. We get to see better colors, shinier landscapes without our eyes, right? And when we open our mouths, we make images. We make other people see these things that are not here, maybe in our minds. So we are, in that sense, magical and profoundly creative. And the most important thing about this is that these two things, dreams and language, are available to every single human being. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to have talent. You don't have to go to college. You don't have to be rich, have rich parents. You get to dream and speak. But of course, the responsibility behind that is that we have to cultivate a relation with dreams and language. For most people, especially in the English-speaking world, language is transparent. They use this thing to, deal with the world, but they don't repair in the form of language. And so language is our doom and our salvation.
Yeah.
And that is, again, paradoxical, because we experience something and it's extraordinary, whether here or in a dream. And our immediate natural impulse is to share it with somebody else, which in itself is extraordinary. We don't want to keep these things for ourselves. We really want to put them in the world. So now we have to find the words to present that experience in language. And what happens there that is beautiful is that the moment we do that, language becomes the experience. Mm-hmm. Because they're not going to see what we saw. Sadly, it's unlikely. But they're going to see this rhythm, this cadence, these sounds, these forms. And now we have to make that as extraordinary as possible, so that experience in itself can have something of the actual experience we had, but its own reality. So so that's the good part. The bad part is that we use language just to put things in boxes. Mm-hmm. Again, we put things in a cage and we say, I know what you are. I know who you are. I know what you do. I know what that is. And then, of course, I mean, I was reading the other day and I feel so jealous. I was reading a medieval, an Arab medieval encyclopedia. And I read that they had, maybe they still do, I hope they do, they had a different name for the hair that grows on the top of the head of a woman than from the hair that covers their forehead. The hair that grows at the back of the neck has a different name. The hair that curls behind the ear has a different name than the hair that brushes the shoulders. We call it hair. We have one word for everything. It's so sad, so profoundly sad. But to me, that has to do with the fact I am not interested in knowing the names of things. And when I, for example, interact with birds, I don't care what kind of bird it is, especially because if I call it by that name, the bird won't believe me. I mean, the words blue jay, sparrow, starling mean nothing to a bird. But I want to be able to give things a name. I mean, I want to be able to know that the name of this hair is different than the name of this hair. And those names, as they are given, are always temporary. There may be somebody else that comes and assigns a better name. And in that, we expand the limits of language, and therefore we expand the limits of our gaze. We can see now in the thing is different because somebody gave it another name. And that is very different than just saying this is it and that's that. So language is a loaded gun. You can use it to kill people or to just open up a window.
Yeah, I'm very fascinated by language being bilingual. And I'm, especially when I read translated Russian literature works, having read the originals, I'm always fascinated by the ways the language is used to translate. And I'm fascinated in my field because recently somebody contacted me and they said, well, you know, you have some terminology on your website toward non-binary individuals that is not good. And I started to think our need to codify everything and our need to use this language to not only control everything, but to make a sense of it. That, how should I say it? In other words, I think that we get so lost and so wrapped up in mentalizing, and in mentalizing our own personalized projections. I think the way language is today is incredibly narcissistic, right? Not only do we need to detox, and I agree with you, there's salvation parts, the paradox to the language too. And I feel that the salvation part starts with first acknowledging, I don't know. How can you demean it? You know, I got one of the books on Camilla's latest book on demon a few days ago, and before I opened it, I cut my finger. And the first thing I said, but of course, you're getting book on demon, you cut your finger. And the second thing I said, you just cut your finger. This has nothing to do with this. So this need, and I think the salvation starts with moving ourselves away from seeing ourselves in everything and seeing ourselves embedded in this world as if this world is us and we are this world.
Yes, that's beautiful. And it is a great example because I do think that there is an aspect of life that becomes more interesting if you cut your finger when you are handling a book about demons, than if you cut your finger handling a book about lettuce or how to build a salad. Right? But at the same time, we have to acknowledge our poetic proclivity and say, oh yes, I'm seeing the poetry of the moment. It doesn't mean that something has been decreed. And that is it's a very elegant place to be, which is really hard for a lot of people to achieve because they want the certainty of the thing. And I think with a lot of people, when they, I mean, the reason why I admire poets is because a poet can actually die for a metaphor, knowing it is a metaphor. Most people will happily die for a metaphor as long as they are convinced that it's a literal truth. And that is there. It requires a certain elegance, and it can, again, maybe a certain freedom to understand. I get to experience this. I mean, the other day I was walking on 8th Avenue on 23rd Street, near from where I live, and I have been collecting these dream books that they sell in Botanicas, the Santeria places. And I like them because they are usually very old, or at least they are the copy of the copy of the copy of something old. They look like Pulp Fiction. They are cheap and colorful and crappy. but they are pre-psychoanalysis. So there is no self, there is no search for deeper urges. It's just poetry. So I now and then I will carry one in my pocket and walk around, and if something happens, I will look it up and see what they say, because it's just beautiful. So I'm walking on 8th Avenue, and a seagull was flying very low. The seagull was flying at the level of the street lights, which is rare. They are usually high up. It came around and landed right in front of me, which was, this has never happened. Here you get to see a lot of seagulls by the river, but this was further into the city. And it just came like where I was. It was like when you think you recognize a person, so you rush and say, hey, are you Amanda? And then you look up and say, oh, I'm sorry. Because as soon as the seagull looked at me, realized I was not whoever she thought I was, it left, right? She left. So I had this dictionary on me, and I pulled it out, and I looked for seagull. And in this dictionary, if you dream of a seagull, that means that you should stop believing in fortune tellers. So it was wonderful. Not only because of the moment was wonderful, but also if you think about it, what kind of meaning is this? It's such an insane, I mean, how you get there, right? How do you get to seagull means stop believing in fortune tellers? There is another one that says, if you dream of a poet, you will be accessory of a bank robbery. This is the best poetry.
Yeah.
So you can engage with it as poetry and enjoy being here, because I did saw a seagull, and that in itself is extraordinary. And then I get to enjoy the old being there, being in this symbolic world, in which that means stop believing in fortune tellers. But the key, I think, for this is that neither the seagull nor the meaning in the book is about me. They are just things that exist. They have discrete realities or discrete configurations. And at some point, because I was there, they touched. But that I am there as a witness of the beauty of and the poetry of the moment. My hunger, maybe is an unfair thing to say, but my hunger is not for meaning in terms of daily life. I have a hunger for beauty. Mm-hmm. So I get to satisfy that hunger without ever making that about me. And again, I think that's very difficult because a lot of people have a very urgent hunger about specific things they feel they are not, they don't have.
Yeah.
And we are, yeah, well, also we are doomed again to our folly, because we think that if we get those things, then we are going to be okay and life can begin. So people spend their entire lives waiting for life to begin because there's a piece that is missing. It's the perfect job, the car, the girlfriend, the boyfriend, their parents' approval. And life has been going on all along. I mean, I find it funny when I talk to people in their 60s, 70s, that they're still trying to figure out the meaning of their life. I say, but your life happened. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not going to be fantastic the next 5 to 20 years you got, but you already lived a life. I mean, you can't keep looking at your life as something that will happen.
Yes.
Your life left you behind. Yeah.
Yeah. I you mentioned psychoanalysis, and I often think how the Freudian talk therapy that started it all, in a way, really doomed us in our use of language, because the minute you're lying on a couch and retelling your dreams or memories, and then what I call you're doing is mental masturbation.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting because I get, once in a while, I will get a client that will tell me their history using completely psychological terminology. And I notice how they are no longer going to therapy. They're living perpetually in therapy by the use of that language. And I heard you say once that terror derails reality, and the next thing that derails reality is the alphabet. And
Yeah.
I think that when we abuse and pollute language the way we do now, it doesn't, today it's not so much that it derails reality, it withdraws us from the reality that we're in.
Yes. I mean, I keep repeating something that it seems to be boring for most people. And it's the fact that we have to build a relationship to our language. That is part of the human experience. We come here and we are given words, fine. But the way we articulate those words to name the world is on us. We could borrow language from somebody, which is what a lot of people do. And it's what you're saying. People speak about themselves in psychological terms or Freudian terms or in Buddhist terms, Zen terms, Catholic terms. Or you can actually do your job and figure out how to speak about yourself in your own terms, which is, I do believe that even if you are 70 or 80 and you have never done that, you have been living a borrowed life. And a lot of the things that people regret or resent about their lives come from the fact that, yeah, but you never got to name your own life. You're just following these patterns. And I agree with you. Sadly, I mean, the two biggest authors of fiction of the 20th century, there should have been one that would be number one. That was Jules Verne. Jules Verne predicted everything. Traveling to the moon. Now they found an ocean under the earth. He saw that the traveling around the world. Somehow nobody cares about it. So we have two authors of fiction that people love, Marx and Freud. And those are the ones we guide our lives by, right? So the result of Freud being so important as an act, I mean, and I mean fiction because he made it all up.
Yes.
I mean, that scientific.
Yes.
And here is the thing. He was a very charming writer. So of course it's super exciting because Jules Verne was saying, well, you can shoot a cannon to this moon and there is something going on, but there is also a world under the world. And Freud was saying there is a world inside of you. And of course, what is more fascinating than ourselves? And say, I take that one. Let me talk about that. Let me think about that. But 100 years later, here we are now with a world that speaks of himself from the language of trauma and victims. Yeah. And if you don't have a trauma and if you don't have a victim of something, you got nothing. There is no currency. How can you relate to the world if you haven't suffered something deep? And it's an impoverishing use of language. Of course, it will be the same as if when people start talking about karma and they don't even know what that is. They just heard and it sounds like, okay, that sounds like something I should say, but you don't know what it is. And people, I was talking to a couple of people the other day, smart people, who told me they are starting to suffer the pain of bad yoga teachers. Over 30 years of yoga by all these people, because at some point, everybody became a yoga teacher and there were more yoga teachers than yoga students, right? So the thing is that they say, now I realize that a lot of these teachers push my body beyond where it should go. Because of course they didn't know. I mean, we adopted that thing and we say, that's very good for you, but we don't know who these people are. And that happens. And again, yoga is a language, like karate is a language, tennis is, I mean, we adopt languages and we try to understand the semantic of this world, the syntax, and we try to mimic whatever that is to achieve that form. Because the hardest thing in the world is to find a form. So we cling to any form we find along the way. And to our detriment. So I agree with you. I think that I think Freud and psychoanalysis kill dreams for us. What you were saying before is so true. Yeah. I mean, a dream is a discrete reality, just like the street down there is a discrete reality. The very idea that the dream is inherently symbolic is insane. I mean, I'm pretty sure that dreams don't care about us. They're just happening. And yes, we can translate any experience, inner or outer, in terms of our human existence. We can use anything as a symbol to figure out our own thing, which I think is wonderful. It's part of what we can do. I was talking to a friend. I'm so marveled about the fact that, we went out in the world, we were hungry, and then we were looking for marks on the ground because we needed to find animals to eat. And we were looking up at the stars because we needed to find our way back once we got the animal we were going to eat. And we learned to read by looking at the sky and by looking at things. I mean, we learned to read centuries before we learned to write, probably before we learned to speak. And at some point we did something, and it happens at all levels, right? Because by the same token, we learned to chirp like birds, to get close to the birds so we could eat it. It was not poetry. But at some point, this chirping, the sounds of an elk became words. So now they not only represent that thing that is in front of me, they represent this abstraction. And at the same time, well, yeah, we can read the marks on the ground, or we can read the marks in the sky, but we can make a model of it. And this is absolutely insane. It's built within ourselves to leap into a symbolic reality as soon as we can. So we build these models for reality that we call divination, based on this absolutely insane premise, which is, if I can find it in the model, it will be there in reality.
Yeah.
It's insane and beautiful at the same time. It's the foundation of poetry, right? And I mean, the other day I went to the doctor for a checkup, and it's always, I find that the main problem with doctors is a problem of language. Of course, it's the fact that the first thing a doctor should be, I mean, a medical doctor, they should be inspiring. That's the first thing. They deal with life. You should go there, and you should buy, they should have the brochure for life. Say, yes, I'm convinced I should keep living.
Yes.
You go there and they don't talk to you. They look at a screen. They ask you about numbers. And then you wonder, am I a bunch of numbers? Is that really me? Okay. So I was so tempted, but of course I decided not to be annoying, to show her my palm and say, I have this little break here that one time, many years ago, a gypsy told me, this break in your lifeline means that you're going to experience an extraordinary loss at some point, and that will derail your life. And I have to say that he had a lineage of gypsy people. He was also a Michael Jackson impersonator. So I didn't took his words with the weight they, deserve, maybe. But I was so tempted to show it to the dogs and say, when is this coming? It already happened? I mean, can you tell me, with all your machines and the computer, where is this happening? And you realize we have this extraordinary ability to build symbolic worlds. And we go back to both things, the impoverishment of language, the fact that we are really bad at building symbolic worlds, and the responsibility we have of building these symbolic worlds, which basically means the responsibility we have to enrich other people's life by our presence. That's our job. I mean, it doesn't matter if we live or die because we're specks of sand, fine. But in the meantime, as we are here to make other people's life more interesting, more bearable. I mean, I had a fantastic thing that happened to me the other day. I was talking to this friend of mine, a dear friend of mine. We were talking about the word Eden in the book of Genesis and how many concepts are embedded in that word in the original Hebrew. And I could see that there was this lady that was eavesdropping. So I could see that we were talking and she was in the conversation with us. So at some point she came, pulled up a chair and sat with us. And I thought, this is extraordinary. This is
Yeah.
what a cafe is for. I really am grateful when something like that can happen. But then her question was, okay, but what about gender equality in the book of Genesis? And I felt, okay, lady, you took a risk. You came here. You failed to deliver. Because I can't talk to the guys who wrote that book and say, can you please change that?
Yeah.
There is no, I mean, if you don't feel represented by that book, you put it aside and that is that. But there is not a lot we can do about it or talk about it. So what I mean is not that equality is not important. She
Right.
didn't have anything interesting to say about this thing. She just dumped this dead fish there on the table saying, okay, do something with it. But I can't, because this is a done deal. It's a book written
Right.
5,000 years ago by people who actually follow that one way or another. I don't particularly care. I care for words. So I can't do anything. And what I mean is, she failed at the job of making my life more interesting, which is our job. This brief moment we spend in this world, we are here to make other people's life more interesting. And it's not, I mean, it's a task that starts with language. It starts with us being able to talk. I mean, the other day, I overheard another couple of ladies talking. They were older, and one of them traced the lineage of her nasal congestion since she was 13 to now. That was, you know, let's talk about my nose for 45 minutes. And I felt this woman is full of phlegm. I mean, that's all she got. All she got is that thing. And she's giving it to the world. And I understand that. But at some point we have to step back and think, what is the effect I'm having in the world? Am I really talking about my nose? And how that makes anybody's life better?
Yes.
Let alone her own life. So I do think that, again, that all comes back to this eternal narrative of the patient. I mean, psychoanalysis turned all of us into mental patients. So we talk about ourselves. Oh, you know, I'm a little bipolar. I have OCD. I have this thing, and I have this fear of commitment. And they say, no, you are you. And somehow there has to be something better to name as you than all those recipes.
Yeah, I think psychoanalysis is what social media it also amplified, right? The mirror reflection, all I see is me and everything is I. That was psychoanalysis, right? Let's amplify you and
Yeah.
have you exploded this balloon. But that woman that sat at the cafe talking about gender inequality brings up another point of not only are we controlling language, but we're also policing the language, right?
Yes.
Which I see very common today, people feeling the right, and they get very almost heated up. It's very visceral, personal, that they have a right to police the language. But to finish up, I have a question actually from my husband for you. But it's a question that's interesting to me too. You're in New York City. I would assume you have been to High Line.
Yes, of course. I live next to it.
Oh, fantastic. My husband is, every time we go, and we go to New York once or twice, because I have a sister at Rockaways, he visits High Line every single time. And I've been to High Line with him. And for those who are listening and don't know, High Line used to be an old industrial railroad that was abandoned. And it's interesting because it's situated above the ground. And it was abandoned and it started to get its own natural habitat of these plants. And they wanted to tear it down, but some people said, no, let's preserve it. And the way they preserved it is they not only transported additional native plants to this habitat, but what's interesting about High Line is because it's almost like a linear. It's not like a park.
Yes.
It's linear as you walk. So the question that I have for you, and I'll read it to get the essence of it. So the question is High Line conductive or bringing relationship with the world to people, or is it just trendy nature? By becoming fashionable, does it lose its natural meaning?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think about that a lot because I like to go sit in gardens around the city. And usually the gardens I sit at are older, a little chaotic. And for example, there is a beautiful garden further down that is the name is in African, in some African language, which I cannot remember, but it translates as the garden at the end of the world. So I go there when I can, and they have very tall built the trees. And it's, of course, you are inside the garden and you feel that you are in nature, but you are 5 steps away from a highway or something. And one day I was there and I saw this family of French tourists, the father, the mother, 2 kids, maybe 12, 10. And they were looking, like double checking the brochure they had, because some printed publications sent them to this place that, of course, for a French who has Versailles or whatever, this was not a garden. This is just a bunch of trees and broken benches and maybe something. It was, they couldn't believe that they were sent there. But most of the people who go to these gardens, and this is the point I want to make, they know how to use them.
Yes.
They go to these gardens to see, to look at nature, to read, to maybe have lunch, to meet with a friend. And I see these all across these gardens. There is another garden at Elizabeth Street that I like to go, and sometimes you have these young women sunbathing there because that garden is in what's, I guess, what still wants to believe is an Italian neighborhood. So there is the neighborhood backyard. They go there to do that. And you realize they know how to use the garden, and it's a beautiful thing to see. Then you have the highland, and I remember those meetings, like town meetings, where they were trying to figure out what to do with that thing. And to some extent, the fact that it became a park is surreal. It's a very strange thing that it actually something good came out of it. Because I think at some point they realized that taking it down was too expensive, so they had to do something with it. They couldn't leave it the way it was. So they built this park, and we have seen every stage of it being built. Even now, further up from where I am right now, they just build this beautiful bridge made out of wood that will connect like the last part to some buildings in Hudson Yard. That's just happening. I mean, it's still growing. So I enjoy the fact that this thing exists. They have the most extraordinary magnolia trees there. There is a section where you have the gigantic magnolias that you can't believe how big they are. Mm. But I think that it is a place that people still don't know how to use. Yeah. So they go there because they are told they have to go there. And it is beautiful. My wife loves to, she prefers to walk on the highland than on the street. But most of the people you see there, they're like looking around, trying to figure out, because it's just this straight line. You can't really sit anywhere. I tried, believe me. At the beginning, I tried to go up there and read a book at a bench. It's impossible. It's too many people, and you have this thing happening all the time. A friend of mine came, and he's from Denmark, and we walked the original section when it was sold. And he said, train tracks leading nowhere is not something you can get away with in Europe anymore. Because for him, this conjure other things that we don't see here, right? It's similar to Little Island, which is now this island we have by the Hudson River. Somebody built a park that is an island. It's an artificial island. So I became friends with a gardener there. And I go now and then there to talk to him. And at first, you had to stand in line for hours. And this was like 4 or 5 blocks long line. So I asked him, what's the deal here? I mean, people wait in line all that time. They go in. There's nothing to do here. They go up, all the way up. They look around and they leave. And he said, well, it's like when you were younger and you would go to a club and you had to stand outside and you really want to go in and there's a line and then the guy finally let you in. And at the end, you end up sitting next to the bar with a drink. doing nothing. I mean, there is nothing, right? It's just the expectation of something. So the highland, little island, these are parks that have the potential to be gardens that maybe are too new. People still don't know how to use them.
Yeah.
And because they are promoted as a spectacle, it's like an attraction. You have to go see this thing. People go there with I guess, to bring it back to the beginning, they go there with expectations that are opposite to the possibility of looking at the sea.
Yeah.
They are there to say they went there, which is the reason why most tourists do whatever they do. I mean, if you go to Dumbo in Brooklyn, there is that part which I always think that something bad is happening because you have all these people and like an anxiety that you don't understand. So I always think there was an accident or something, and then I remember, no, it's the bridge. They're taking the picture. Everybody's taking the same picture in front of the bridge, which is the only picture you will ever see. I know that if you walk one block in any direction, you can make a different picture of the bridge, and it's just there. It's the same bridge, but that's not good. You need that one, right? And tourists do that, which is I do think being a tourist is a weird thing, which doesn't mean being a tourist is not necessarily the same thing as being a traveler.
Mm-hmm.
Being a tourist means that you have no skin in the game. You're just passing by and you're looking, but you don't care, right? You're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that, but you don't really learn anything from the place you were to. So I understand what your husband is saying. I think those are places. I avoid the highland on the weekends because you can't walk.
Yeah.
It's just a mass of people moving. So anything that is conducted to introspection within those spaces, to the experience of nature, to waking up from the dream of the city, it's not going to happen there. But it may happen at some point when it loses the novelty, when the trees grow taller, when people find that there are benches they can sit. I do think that when you see that in the cities, wherever there is a garden, the old gardens, people know this is an invitation for me to stop. And they take on the invitation. I mean, I think we are all longing for an invitation to slow down.
I miss the High Line. I was always captivated when I would go there by the discrepancy between, and I felt like the only people who were taking it in were kids, because they would stop and engage with the plants and play, and all the adults were on the cell phone or taking pictures of it, and it was very interesting because we bring in this native nature. And it's such interesting nature because it's so organic and wild. It beckons to have a dialogue with.
And I do think that is very important. We were in Williamsburg the other day with my daughter, and I was showing her by the river again. You have all these plants are weeds. I mean, these are natural. What is autochthonal or natural from the place? It's just weeds. There is no roses. There is no beautiful. And maybe the highland popularized this idea that we can let the whatever is from the place to grow and thrive. And there is some extraordinary value in that. I mean, that you don't have to build a garden full of hedges and rose plots to feel that you are in a garden. Because as you say before, I do think the hedge, this idea of the garden, is a typographical element.
Yeah.
This is turning the garden into a text that I'm supposed to read in a certain way. We're going to move this way. You're going to then stay here. This is the center, the main idea. Then you have these flowers that represent this and the other flowers. Everything becomes allegorical, which is useful or beautiful to some extent, but it's still, we are putting things in a cage.
Yes.
So I do like this idea that people now are valuing more the natural, the plants that were originally from here and letting them be.
Yeah, the landscape architecture, just like any other architecture, you can beckon the natural engagement with it, or you can superimpose your idea of engagement on it, which is, the straight lines. But yeah, I'm going to New York in the end of this month. So we'll see if we'll visit and how different the High Line looks. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
No,
It has been such a pleasure to engage in a conversation with
thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure. And when you come to New York, please let me know so we can have coffee.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you.